You are listening to 15 Minutes, the show with Osiris Munir, only on LA Talk Radio.
I felt like doing Eddie Murphy when Eddie Murphy does. Welcome to the neighborhood. He goes, hi. Hi, everybody out there. Welcome back to 15 Minutes of Show and LA Talk Radio Live. It is I, in person, in spirit, in the flesh, Osiris with 15 Minutes to Show. So what's going out there? It is way too much going on out there for me to handle. So I'm going to try to handle just right in front of me. So today, I wanted to kind of skip into a topic before we bring our very special guest on. So I wanted to talk about race relations and racial things and people having differences of opinion. I've never understood. Now, maybe when I was kind of unenlightened, I understood a little bit more about that. But all I can say about that is that I do believe that people that hate other people ultimately hate themselves. I mean, how do you hate people you don't even know? I mean, think about it. Brain goes off. How do you hate people you don't know? And then I do believe that in the coming, not in the coming, but in the times we're living in now, people that think like that, people that are limited, people that can't get outside of their own skin, they can't get outside their own brain, they don't know how to flex enough, they're not using even a, what do we use? A little bit of the brain, they're not even using a quarter, the P part of the brain. They're just kind of animalistic in behavior. Those people will cease to exist. They're going to eventually burn out. Nobody wants to hear all of that right now. We have too many other problems to be trying to go back and slide back into some old mode of thinking when everything in our lives is asking us to push forward. So that's what I have to say about that. Okay. So I did something special. Drum roll. We have a very special guest today. He's a friend of mine. I've known him for a long time, seen him grow into coming from already being famous to now super celebrado. So I'm going to say the first part of his introduction in Spanish, just so I can talk Spanish. And I practiced last night and this morning just for him. So, hoy tengo el maravilloso placer de presentaris al padrino de la salsa romántica, La Palabra, desde Colombia. Bienvenidos! Yeah! Now I want to talk English again.
You did great. You did great. Wow. That was great.
Thank you. So what's happening? ¿Qué pasado contigo hoy?
Well, everything is moving in the right direction. It was just when you first opened the show, you did mention about race relation. And it's such a natural thing in the US to talk about race because it happens, but then when you move away, it's not in your face like that, It's really amazing.
And we're going to talk about that because one of the first questions I want to bring up now, for those of you out there who don't know who La Palabra is, La Palabra in Espanol means the word. And like I said, when I introduced him, he is the El Padrino de la Salsa de la Romantica Musica. So before Mark Antony, before all of these people came to be known for Salsa Romantica Musica, La Palabra was well into, had birthed it, breathed it, made it happen, and brought it to life. So we're going to talk about first the incident in New York in 1987, and it made the headlines of the New York Times. I believe it said something like, Black Cubans apart in two worlds, and you're Cuban and you're Black. So I want to hear your take on that. What was going on in New York and the world at that time so you can bring everybody up to date?
Well, the article was done in the New York Times, but the incident took place in Georgia, in Attic. It's a jail called Attica. Right. And the incident was that I think it was in the 80s, a lot of Cubans left the island and they were put in jail and where they were waiting for sponsors to take them out and help them start a new life. but the black Cubans were not getting any sponsors. So they got to a point where they just couldn't take it anymore, and they riot. They made one of the biggest riot in the jail in Georgia, and it was so big that it got national attention.
Mhm.
So what happened is the New York Times went and started investigating about the situation in Georgia, and they also ended up in Miami because that's where most people were being sponsors from, but black Cubans were not getting any sponsors.
Mhm.
Now, I don't know who told them about me because in those days I was already frustrated with the Miami lifestyle and the racial situation I was going through. But they knocked on my door and they said, "This is the New York Times. We came to interview you," just like that.
Wow.
So when they started asking me questions, that was exactly the subject. How was I being treated in Miami as a black Cuban? So my answer was, I have never been so discriminated in my life until I arrived in Miami.
Mhm.
That's how that happened.
So now, how did you get into the US? What got your drive working and your mojo working to come to the US? What led you here from Panama? Was it from Panama? Cabanera,
No,
Panama.
Cuba,
Oh, you're from
Guantanamo,
Cuba. Okay,
Guantanamo.
okay.
No, it
So what?
wasn't my decision. I was only 15, and my mom had married a naval Marine
Mhm,
from the US. So that gave her the opportunity to take the family out on a visa. So I just had to follow along. It wasn't like I said, "Oh, I want to go to the US." I
mhm,
the decision was made for me.
mhm.
So I left Cuba when I was 15 years old. And in those days, if you were 15 or over 65, you could leave the country. But anything in between, you could not leave the country.
Oh,
So I
wow.
barely made it in those days. And yeah, my family left with my grandmother, my sister. The close part of my family, we left Cuba in 1966.
Mhm. And what happened? And I mean, what was going on in Cuba for you guys to want to leave? It wasn't some wonderful life. What was going on over there to make your mom want to have to pack up and get a visa
Well,
to come to the
a lot of situation was going on. Uh, like I said, I did not leave because of any political
reason?
situation, not
Mhm,
me.
mhm,
But what happened is after Castro took over, there was beginning to be problem with the United States,
mhm,
and he intervened some companies that were Americans, and Castro was very defiant to the Americans' uh, control that they had in Cuba. So that's what happens. The U.S. used to mandate almost everything in Cuba. As a matter of fact, they had something called the Platt Amendment, which gave the United States the right to invade Cuba anytime they felt it was necessary. So the Platt Amendment was eventually abolished,
uh-huh,
but the power of the U.S. was still in Cuba. I mean, they control everything. So when Castro took over, his mindset was liberate Cuba from the United States um, um, clause, like they say. And that started a lot of problems because many Cubans that, like the United States, felt that Cuba was not heading in the right direction.
mhm,
So that's what prompted a lot of Cubans to start migrating to the United States. My father migrated to New York, and my mother migrated to New York also. But
okay.
it was more like a political thing because Castro was really um, the
Upset.
first revolutionary in Latin America,
Mhm,
and the United States was afraid that his mindset could spread to other Latin countries. So since the 60s, the United States has imposed economic blockade in Cuba,
Hmm.
and Cuba has been suffering for over 60 years.
Hmm. I see now a lot of people understand that, and to be honest with you, when you said that, all I could see was the scene in Scarface when Al Pacino and the other guy were in there and they were in prison and they were no, they had just come over from the boat and they started going through and saying La Libertad, La Libertad. And remember he started stabbing the guy in the chest or something like that. And the fact that all of that political tension was there. And there's always a way that people find to get out of a situation. Your mom led you out of that into New York. Now, how did music, how did La Palabra? How did what your name is Fito? What is your real name? Fito.
Palabra, palabra,
Yeah,
la palabra.
La Palabra. So, how did you get the name La Palabra? Who started? Who did they name you La Palabra? Did you become a La Palabra? I feel like it's something you became. You became La Palabra, the
Well,
word.
I did became La Palabra once I changed my name. It took a few years,
Hmm.
but the incident took place in California,
Hmm.
where I was performing in a club called Candilejas, and during the intermission, I was so tired because I used to give it all on stage. That's one of the things I try to do all the time. So I sat down in a table. They didn't have a rest, uh, what they call it, a, a place where the artist
Oh,
can relax. Yeah. So I was out sitting down, and a guy comes to me and say, "Hey, that guy over there wants to meet you." So I got up. I went to his table, and he says to me, he stands up and he says, "My name is La Palabra." So I say, "La Palabra." So he repeat the name, but it wasn't La Palabra. It was another name.
uh, uh,
But I understood La Palabra so clearly that when I left the club that night, it was spinning in my mind, La
mhm.
Palabra. And the more it spin, I liked the name and I adopted the name La Palabra.
That's nice. Now, were you a musician back in Cuba, or did you become a musician over in the United States? Because I know in your bio, you went to school at Cooley High. You that was a whole group of people, and they were all. I mean, everybody knows about Cooley High. Come on, if you don't know what Cooley High, go look it up. Go look it up. And you were in this group of people that were kind of destined to move into entertainment. And I believe you came to California because of Stevie Wonder or something like that. What happened? Let us know what happened to take you out of New York and lead you into the path of now you're a badass.
Well, to answer your first part, my grandmother taught me the piano,
Mm,
and I became like a favorite in Caimanera, which is a little town, like a village town near the ocean. And
Come on.
so I was playing the piano. My grandmother taught me. And there was a time where they were having a contest with two bands, and they were all professional musicians, but they needed a piano player. So somebody said, "Oh, there's a little boy playing the piano over there. He could
How
probably
old
come
were
in and do
how
the
old?
piano." I was 11.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah. No, I was 13. I started playing at 11. I was 13 when that happened. So they went and got me. I practiced with the band. And when I got on stage, I could not sit still in that piano. And the audience went crazy with me, the way I was moving and everything. So my band won the contest because every time they put the hand over my head, the crowd went wild. So
Ah.
that day, it was the beginning of me feeling like a star. It was the first time I was in front of
Cara.
an audience, and
Yeah.
they loved me. So at the age of 13, that was my first experience to to wake up that inner musician that I had that began to grow. So that's at that time my mom already had left Cuba. So we were packing our stuff, and the government, since I won the prize, they wanted me to go to a special school.
Mhm.
But my grandmother refused because if I went to that school, that meant I could not leave Cuba.
Oh.
So we kind of waited it out. And 3 years later, we left Cuba. But my first step in the United States of America, my very first step was a very weird experience. Because what happened is we landed in Miami and
Mm-hmm.
everybody was so joyful and, screaming and, they felt like they were free now. So I
Mm-hmm.
was looking through the window and I saw everybody boarding and boarding, getting off the airplane.
Okay.
And, there was so many newspapers and photographers lined up taking pictures. And, I already felt like a little star. So I was dying to get out there and have my picture taken.
Yeah.
So I'm looking down to the window and oh my God, it was a frenzy. So when it's time for my family to come out, I was the first one at the gate and I started going down the stairs. And the minute I put my feet on the ground, it was like a tunnel, a dark tunnel. And it was very eerie to be walking in this dark situation when before there was so many pictures and so many things going on. So as I left that area and I looked back, they were taking pictures all over again. So what had happened? They did not take pictures of us because we were black.
Oh.
That's what happened. So they were
Mm.
taking pictures of everybody except when we showed up, no pictures.
Not that it's
That was
funny,
my
but the way you
state of
said it, you
America.
said, look, all of a sudden, he saw lights and cameras. My man saw lights, stars, action. Then all of a
Yeah,
sudden, it was a dark tunnel. I mean, where
it's like a tunnel.
the lights go?
And
What
I'm not exaggerating. I'm not
happened?
exaggerating. That's exactly how it was. Nobody took a picture.
That's so
Nobody.
sad.
Yeah.
And I think it's sad. Again, going back to race relations, if I talk to you some more, that's sad. You are really limiting an experience. That's a human experience. I mean, I got to learn so much from being in the military and from hanging around with other cultures and learning everything from how they eat, how they cook their food, how they worship and everything, and having those experiences and bringing them back to my own culture and and enhancing the beauty of my own culture by being able to be open to other people. So when you got off the plane, were you there for a reason? Were you going into the airport because you had to perform somewhere? You were with the band, and I want to know how you went from a single musician to orchestra. Your orquesta.
Oh,
It's la orquesta, it's the orquesta la palabra. So how did you get that big? I mean, from one you, from
well,
one
what
you, where did
happened is
you come
the
from?
situation in the airplane had nothing to do with music. It was
Oh,
Cubans Cubans leaving the island. That was it.
so they were
It was
singing.
it was called the Freedom Flight. But
Mm,
I had stars in my eyes from the experience I had with the band when I played. But nobody there was a musician. Everybody was just families that were getting off the airplane
oh,
first time in the United States. And
okay.
that's what happened. So I landed from there. We went to New York City.
Hmm.
New York City was a very exciting city, like it still is.
Yeah,
But
believe it.
you got to remember, when I got there in 1966, they had the racial situation was wild. Martin
Hmm.
Luther King, Malcolm X, um, the hippies were all the way, they were trying to live their lifestyle. The
Freaking.
Vietnam War, the Vietnam War was going. So all those things were all part of the society that I came into when I came to the United States.
Hmm.
So it was hard to adjust because in Cuba, I was on the Vietnamese side. No, I'm in the United States, which is the other side of Vietnam. And I'm like, this is weird. You know what I mean? So
Uh-huh. So,
I had to digest the racial situation, the hippie situation, and the Vietnam War because they used to have demonstrations very violent demonstrations against the war
That's
when
right.
I first landed in New York City. And the same thing that happened to me in New York, in Cuba, happened to me in New York. When I got to New York, my mother bought a piano and I was playing the piano. And there was a group of professional musicians. They
Mhm.
were called the New Yorican Sectet. This was
New
all
York,
professional guys. Yeah,
New York Sextet. Uh-huh. Go ahead.
yeah. The New York Sectet, the New Yorkina in Spanish.
Yeah.
So they needed a piano player. So somebody said, "Oh, there's a little boy in Brooklyn
They can play the
can
piano.
play the piano." So at the age of 15, I joined that band, and I was playing all over the clubs in New York City at that age, and I was leaving New York to the most, really. For being 15 years old, I was around musicians. I was really having a blast in New
I
York.
can feel it. I feel the energy because when you're talking about it, it's like your body's sending out these energy pieces, and if you're sensitive, you can feel it. So I can. It's like I went back and I felt you being the young teenage with stars in their eyes, and the first time in the U.S. and all these badass musicians, and you're coming into your own. I mean, come on, man. That is the height of being a teen and what you went through. But what I want to find out, how did you become the al padrino de la salsa romantica music? Because I know that they've always given credit to, I don't have anything against Mark Anthony or anybody, but you guys know, no matter how long people may think they can get away with things, the truth always comes to light. So if any of you out there really know the truth, I'd suggest as you get older and your soul comes to call for you to bare your soul and tell the truth, tell the truth. If you know the truth, tell the truth. This man, I've seen what he composed. I've seen what he did when I first met him. And he has proof that he is the one and only Al Padrino de Salsa Romantica. So tell us what happened, Palabra.
Well, it was a process. For example, when I was in New York, I was absorbing the blues in Harlem. Harlem was bustling in those days, and
Mhm.
there was a lot of nightclubs and jazz. And my father took me to the Apollo Theater. That was the first time I saw James Brown and the Miracles. And I was like, wow, how come I never heard these guys in Cuba? Because all you ever heard was Elvis Presley, all these other guys, and Nat King Cole, and a
Oh,
little bit of Richard, but you never heard raw soul like Wilson Pickett, James
no.
Brown, the Miracle, the Temptations. I never heard of them. So I was in the Apollo Theater, and I was like taken back by the experience. Well, that experience, and musically, when I moved to Detroit, because I only lived in New York 1 year because my mom decides to leave New York and go to Detroit, and I cried like a baby because I was just beginning to let loose because I was in a lot of pain when it comes to learning a new society and leaving Cuba. So
Yes.
1 year I lived in New York City. My mom decided to go to Detroit. And what was the welcome committee in in Detroit when we got there? It was the biggest riot in the United States of America.
What were they writing
1960
about? The same thing? What was the
1968, the biggest riot in the United, and I land in Detroit in the middle of the riot.
riot?
We
Wow.
had to go home like when you're docking bullets in the car, and we go. That's how we were
I did.
driving to get home. I mean, the
Unfortunately, I
National Guard was all over the place,
did. Yeah.
and we were like, I mean, you imagine being confused. I was confused already in New York, but to see this now in the U.S., it was us. It was really, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. So we finally made it home. We couldn't get out. We couldn't go out anymore, and I live in Detroit. Detroit was so different from New York City. New York City had a Latin community. It had, the Jewish, the Italian, and you kind of you didn't mingle with everybody, but that's New York. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
when you go to Detroit, it became a very segregated place. I remember streets, like for example, 12th Street, which is where Motown used to be, in
Okay.
12th Street, and I forgot the other name. That area was the black area. Then from 12th Street up, it was the white area. I never seen that before in my life.
Hmm.
And then after the riots, whites move up, and then blacks keep moving up, and whites keep moving up, and blacks keep moving. I mean, I
Like
lived
now.
that. I saw street by street how blacks kept going forward, and then blacks go, white people could go backward, and they were, backing up, and black people kept taking over certain neighborhoods. So it was really my mom. My mom, my mom was not thinking of racial situation. So when she
No.
bought a house, she buys it in a white area, right? And we don't know. I mean, we just
Ouch.
so
Ouch.
when we got there, I mean, nobody gave us a welcome, nothing, but we didn't know anything. But I tell you, where we lived, in about 2 years later, it was all black neighborhood. When I got to Detroit, they began busing kids. So to answer your question about salsa romantica, that experience that I was having in Detroit, and then when I started going to school, it opened my mind to American music. I
Hmm.
mean, in those days, the American system had the best school program in the world. I'm not kidding. High school was like you could study anything in music, orchestra, choir, and ensemble, big band. I mean, I don't know. There was one senator that took the music program out of schools. I forgot
Hmm.
his name. I don't know why they allow one senator to do that. But the
Hmm.
United States had the best music program ever. I mean, that was one of the best thing of the United States. So they took it. When I went to school, I enjoyed that. I really took that in. So I began to learn arrangements, but I began to listen to a lot of Count Basie and Duke Ellington. And I will
Yeah.
go back as far as uh, Bessie Smith because I'm very much into American culture and the jazz. So I'm like an American in the sense that I can go back in history because
Hmm.
I listen to Cap Galloway, all those guys, and Glenn Miller, all those guys. So I learned to about the big band sound. So little by little, when I was playing now with my band in Detroit, Latin music, I began to do arrangement, but it was influenced by the big band sound. And one of the things that the American composers that do jazz, and I'm not the only one that's going to say this, but they
Hmm.
say that less is more in American music.
What do you mean
And
by
I
that?
believe in that. It's what it's, sometimes you get an arranger and let's say he studied classical music, or when he does the arrangement, the horn parts do not let the singer breathe. So
Oh.
the singer is singing and the horns are playing.
Uh-huh.
And when you listen to jazz musician doing a solo, American black jazz horn players, they are more like para pow, pa pow, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
But if you listen to a lot of Latinos that do jazz, they get too intricate. It's like they miss the boat when it comes to the jazz and having that less is more. And that's the soul part. And that's what made jazz so different in the 50s and 60s, right?
Hmm.
So I learned that style. When I was in Detroit, that I began to play more American music, there was a group that had a hit called Brainstorm. And I don't know if you ever heard of Brainstorm, but Brainstorm, they went all the way to that show Soul Train and everything.
Yeah.
So I was, as a
Brainstorm.
matter of fact, Belita Woods, the singer of that group, ended up with the funky Parliament and the Funkadelic.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. And
Oh.
one of the things that I need to uh, say to your audience is that in my career, I shared the stage with Michael Jackson. I
Uh-huh.
also played for Kobe Bryant birthday party.
All
I
right now.
played in the house of Will Smith for his baby shower.
Hmm.
I also played for a private party for Sandra Bullock and Demi Moore, and everybody was there. Brad Pitt, everybody was there. I also played for a private party for President Clinton. So, and this is just to mention, you remember the guy that made a song called The Boat Wiggle? The Boat
The
Wiggle?
the boat wiggle.
Yeah, it was like something
So
about
how
the
does it
bird.
go?
Like, huh?
How does it go?
It was an old song from the South. I played with him too. I mean, I met in my career, I began to meet so many musicians uh, that when I began to play in Detroit with Brainstorm, it was so exciting. It was the days that a band was like Orwin and Fire. It was like
Yeah.
self-contained because the bands before they were more like the Temptations,
Yeah.
the Miracles. But then when bands like Orwin and Fire and then they came on, they were the entertainers, they were the musician at the same time.
Hmm.
That's what
Hmm.
made the 70s so different. So all the bands were singers and they play an instrument and they did the show. See? So that's what became in the 70s. And I enjoyed playing with Brainstorm until the group got dropped by CBS. So I was playing in another club, and this guy says, "Hey, I love the way you play the piano. We're doing a project with Stevie Wonder, and we'd like you to be part of it." So I go, "Oh man, come on, man! I used to play with the Dramatics. I used to play with the brother of the Dramatics. They had a group called the Five Special,
Uh-huh.
and they're
I've heard
open
of some.
coming groups.
Yeah.
But they never went too far. The Dramatics did, but not the others groups. So I say, oh man, as a matter of fact, I was playing with Norma Jean Bell, was a sax player that used to play with the Rolling Stones.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I was pretty hooked up with the music scene in Detroit. So when they told me about Stevie Wonder, I didn't believe it. So I go, so they told me, listen, come over and we're going to call him and you can talk to him. I said, okay. So I went to the house. So they called Stevie Wonder and I talked to Stevie and he said, hi, my name is Stevie, blah, blah, blah. I heard you're a good piano player. I like to get you into this project. Send me a demo so I can listen to the way you play. So I sent him a demo and he loved the way I played. So I became a part of that project called Phoenix Rising.
Yeah.
And with Stevie Wonder, that's how I ended up going to Los Angeles, California. Oh my God, landed in California from Detroit.
Was like a
It was
whole
like
kind
that
of
and there.
like a
Because
different
I live,
planet.
see, I lived in Detroit that was very successful.
Uh-huh.
And after the riots, it began to dry it up. It was like they made an economic embargo on the city of Detroit and it just collapsed. And I could see blocks by blocks, the businesses leaving. I mean, I lived that experience in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
So Detroit is the way it is, but it's people think it's because racial. It's more than that. It was almost done on purpose after the riots. They sucked it up.
Well,
So
wasn't
when I moved from Detroit to LA, um, the streets were in Spanish. The houses were colorful. The greenery. The I used to love to go by Beverly Hills. I mean,
it made you feel
I was
special?
in cloud nine, like they say.
Yeah,
I
like wow.
really enjoyed Los Angeles, and I still do.
Yeah.
And I was in between all the big musicians like Rick James because I was with Stevie Wonder. So
Yeah.
they used to go to the studio. Rick James, guys from Organ on Fire. I mean, you name it.
Yeah.
I used to see them in LA. So my career was really, I felt very happy. But the problem with Stevie is that he was doing so many things that
Mm-hmm.
you have to sit and wait for him to have time for you.
Time to get. Oh yeah.
So why? Because he was trying to get the Martin Luther King holiday and he used to go marching. I mean, people forget how united Black America used to be. I mean,
Used
honestly,
keyword used. Tabby.
I remember.
Mhm.
And they used to, I mean, he used to march for the holiday of Martin Luther King.
Yep.
So time kept passing. So I remember we had a meeting, and I said to Stevie, I don't mind waiting, but could you please tell us, like, how long we're going we're gonna be waiting for you to get this project up the ground? He says, no, no, no. When I come back from Japan, we're gonna go into the studio. And that's what we did. He came back, we went into the studio one time, and that was it. We had to sit and wait again. So
Well, what
so we were waiting. In the meantime, I started mingling in the Latin music scene, you know? So I
Mhm,
started going to the salsa club,
mhm.
and I began to meet musicians. So once I met a musician, his name was Yanni Nelson, and he asked me to come and stay and play the piano, and they loved the way I played the piano. And there were a couple of guys that were starting out a band called Versailles Orchestra. So they loved the way I played the piano, and they told me, hey, why don't you come with us and let's make this band together? And that's how I began to get involved in salsa, even though I was with Stevie Wonder. See? So when that group started, even though the group took off, I mean, in Sunset, I don't know if
Mhm.
you remember that section where they had it's still there, but it's not like it used to be in the 80s.
What?
Where the rock bands used to play. Remember the Troubadour, all those big
Troubadour.
rock clubs that were on Sunset Boulevard.
The whiskey, the troubadour,
Yes, and there you go.
the
All
whiskey
those
is
clubs
still
were,
there.
yeah.
Uh,
I mean, that was the scene in Los Angeles, and
yeah, it was
Candileja was like a few miles down that strip. Well, when you passed my club, it was just like being at the Whiskey A Go Go at those places.
yeah.
The line of people to come in to see the salsa band Versailles Orchestra. So we were a hit in LA.
The Rainbow was a big popular club on
Oh yeah,
Sunset.
I mean LA. I mean, I'm telling you, I live the LA that many people wish they lived because I enjoyed that time. But I began to be more into the salsa scene,
Mhm.
and in that club, I began to do ballads because I used to listen to American ballads. For example, Icy Case when I was in Detroit. Um, all these other artists, um, Barry White, they used to talk.
Yeah,
And when Icy Case came out, it was like the thing.
he was deep.
Icy Case.
Something new.
He used to have the longest intro ever in a song.
The girls, get the sex, talk to the girls.
And I'm talking about on a record. I don't mean live, on a record. That's the
I met
longest
him.
intro
I met
before
him.
he said
Yeah,
hello. So
yeah,
I grew up in that environment.
yeah.
And when I started doing my salsa romantica, which wasn't called that, I didn't have a name for it. Okay. The name came later.
Oh, okay.
What I started to do was taking the pop songs, the ballads, and putting it in the rhythm of Cuban music.
Mhm.
But not just any pop ballad. It was the ones that were a hit, the ones that were being played on the radio. For example, when Kenny Rogers had Lady, I made Lady in salsa.
Uh-huh.
And you could hear Lady with Kenny Rogers, you could hear my version. So it was, um, that's what I was doing. And that's what led to what we have now as salsa romantica, because I was doing all those ballads in the Latin beat, especially Cuban rhythms.
Mhm.
And I did so many of them. And I got to tell a little story now that I'm talking about Lady.
What we're almost close to closing time, so I want to hear it. So go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was in a dinner, a Grammy from the Grammys, and Lionel Richie is leaning against a post by himself.
Mhm.
And I already had done Lady, right?
Mhm.
But I didn't know if he knew that. So I saw him by himself. I go, let me introduce myself to Lionel. So I walked over to Lionel and said, hi, Lionel, my name is La Palabra. He goes, La Palabra.
Uh-oh.
So I go, I'm shocked. He goes, man, let me tell you how I know your name.
You heard lady.
So he says to me, listen, man, I was in a tour in Italy. Hey, like now, your song is a hit here in Italy, but it's not your version. It's this guy called La Palabra. So he says to me, that's why I know your name.
And you know he's
Because
kind of picky
lady,
about. Yeah, he's kind of
huh?
picky about who does his songs too. He's kind of picky about
Yeah.
who
And,
remake his song.
and uh-huh. And he was very excited to meet me and everything. And I have seen him a couple of times after that.
Mhm.
But lady became, if you look at in Wikipedia
Okay.
of Planet Rishi, my name is in his Wikipedia
Uh-uh.
because Lady was such a big hit internationally. My version of Lady was really popular
Skyrocket.
in France, in Europe, all over. And I tell you, even in Beijing, I went to Beijing in 2008,
I
and
remember, yeah.
I went in with an American group for the Olympics, and we were playing for about 4 months. We only had 2 weeks left, and
Hmm.
somebody comes to the club, to the hotel, and they say, "Are you La Palabra?" This is in China,
Wow.
and they said, "Do you want to stay?" I didn't know that the work visa you couldn't stay after your work visa expired. I said,
Oh,
"Yeah, I want to stay." I stayed in China 6 months
wow. So they
because
made
they dance
you
because the
stay.
song "Lady" they still
Was
it's very popular in China. Yeah.
I've heard it's popular all over the world, but listen, we gotta go. I love to talk, and I like people to come on the show that like to talk. So it really has been excited having Palabra. What are your social media tags so that everybody can reach out and find you so you can hear El Tutun? And ladies, he is so sexy when he says
Yeah,
lady.
they can still hear "Lady."
Drops his
Uh,
voice. Say, do
they can.
one bar. Do one bar. Just go a bar.
Okay. Lady, I'm your knight and shiny armor, and I love you.
Uh,
You have made me what I am, and I am
I
yours.
tell you, we gotta go. But listen, what social media? Tell us again. Tell us again your social media so they can reach out. We can reach
Okay, they can find me in the social media under Orquesta La Palabra.
out. Aquí está la palabra.
LDRA.
Okay. And then you also can look up L2 Tune or any of those things and get him. So we're
Yeah,
gonna get about
well,
me
it's
15
Orquesta La Palabra in Facebook, Instagram, everything.
Okay, so La
Well,
Palabra, we gotta go. Don't
it was
forget about
great.
me, 15 minutes of
Bye,
show. Palabra
Osiris.
was nice. Great seeing you and having you on the show, and we'll talk more behind the scenes and I'll have you back. Okay, don't
Okay.
forget about me, 15 minutes of show, LA Talk Radio Live, your girl, Express and Abstract.net and Onk Entertainment One.net. And I'll see you next week on LA Talk Radio Live. Bye. Have a good one. Don't forget to smile, works wonders.
You are listening to 15 Minutes, the show with Osiris Munir, only on LA Talk Radio.